Brothers were mocked for buying tiny forest cabin, but what they found under floor shocked everyone. Mark and David had always been close, even as children. Growing up in a busy city, they often dreamed of escaping to a quieter, simpler life. But like many of their peers, they found themselves caught up in the hustle and bustle of urban living. Both men had successful careers, but the constant noise, the stress of deadlines, and the overwhelming crowds left them yearning for a change. One day, after another exhausting week, Mark had an idea. "Why don't we buy a small cabin somewhere remote?" Mark suggested, half joking. "Somewhere far from the city where we can just relax, do some projects, and forget about everything for a while." David, who was always the more adventurous of the two, immediately loved the idea. They had both been raised with a love for the outdoors, and the thought of owning a quiet cabin in the woods felt like the perfect escape. Over the next few weeks, they searched for properties online. They looked at dozens of listings, each more expensive than the last, but none of them felt quite right. Mark wanted something small, something that didn't need a lot of upkeep but still had character. It had to be remote enough to feel like an escape, but not so isolated that it would be difficult to reach. Finally, they found it, a tiny cabin tucked away in a secluded forest about 3 hours outside the city. The cabin wasn't much to look at. It was small, old, and in need of serious repairs, but there was something about it that felt perfect. The listing described it as a fixer-upper with lots of potential, and the price was shockingly low. The brothers knew this was the one. When they told their friends and family about the cabin, the reactions were less than enthusiastic. Their friends thought they were crazy. "What are you going to do with a tiny cabin in the woods? You'll be miles away from everything," one of them said. Some of their relatives were more direct. "You guys are wasting your money," their uncle remarked. "That place is a dump. There's no way you'll be able to fix it up. You'd be better off buying something else." But Mark and David didn't let the criticism get to them. They were determined to make the cabin their retreat, a place where they could escape the chaos of everyday life. The fact that others didn't understand made them even more determined. They bought the cabin and made plans to head there the following weekend. The first time they arrived at the cabin, the feeling of peace was overwhelming. The air was fresh, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The cabin was small, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room. It had a steep roof, large windows, and a stone fireplace in the corner. It was far from luxurious, but it was exactly what they were looking for, a place to get away from everything. They spent the first few hours exploring the property, which was surrounded by towering trees and thick underbrush. The land was overgrown, with weeds and vines creeping up the walls of the cabin. Mark immediately saw the potential for a garden, and David imagined building a small shed for tools. The brothers were excited. This was the kind of project they had always dreamed of, a place where they could work together, get their hands dirty, and feel accomplished. As the sun began to set, they decided to start the first phase of the renovation, cleaning up the inside of the cabin. The previous owners had left behind a few pieces of furniture, some old rugs, and boxes of forgotten belongings. The cabin smelled musty, like it had been closed up for years, but the brothers didn't mind. They opened the windows to let in the fresh air and began sorting through the piles of junk. They found old newspapers, dusty books, and some strange, unfamiliar tools. But one item caught their attention, a large old chest tucked away in the corner of the living room. It was covered in dust, and the wood was faded, but it had a sense of mystery about it. Mark and David moved closer, intrigued. "Do you think it's locked?" David asked, his curiosity piqued. "I don't know, let's check," Mark replied. They tried to open the chest, but it was stuck. After a few moments of struggling, they managed to pry it open. Inside, they found nothing but a pile of old clothes and some random knickknacks. For a moment, they felt disappointed. They had expected something more exciting, perhaps old coins or hidden treasures. But as they were about to close the chest, something caught Mark's eye. Beneath the pile of clothes, he spotted a worn piece of paper, its edges frayed and torn. It looked like an old letter, faded with age. Mark carefully pulled it out, and both brothers leaned in to examine it. The letter was written in an elegant, looping script, but the language was strange, words and phrases they didn't understand. There was something about it that seemed important, though. Mark carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the chest, a sense of curiosity bubbling up inside him. They decided to keep it as a part of their adventure. With the chest stowed away, they continued cleaning, but as they worked, something strange began to happen. The more they cleaned, the more they noticed about the cabin. There were strange markings on the walls, unusual carvings in the wood, and odd symbols that seemed to repeat in different areas of the house. It wasn't the work of the previous owners, but something older, something that had been hidden for years. David, ever the skeptic, shrugged it off as nothing more than wear and tear. Old houses have all kinds of weird stuff like this. It's just the wood settling. But Mark wasn't so sure. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper to the cabin, something hidden beneath the floorboards or in the walls, just waiting to be uncovered. As they settled into their first night at the cabin, the brothers sat by the fireplace, enjoying the warmth and the quiet. It was everything they had hoped for, peaceful, serene, and far removed from the busy life they had left behind. But as the fire crackled, Mark's mind kept drifting back to the strange letter in the chest. What did it mean? Who had lived here before them? And why had they left behind such a mysterious artifact? The brothers were only just beginning their journey with the cabin, but already they could feel that something big was unfolding. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead them to uncover secrets that no one had expected. The days that followed Mark and David's arrival at the cabin were filled with a sense of excitement and discovery. The brothers quickly fell into a routine. Every morning they would wake up early to the sounds of birds chirping outside, the crisp air filtering in through the windows. They spent the days working on the cabin, cutting down overgrown vines, cleaning out the rooms, and imagining how they would transform the place into their dream retreat. The first task they tackled was clearing out the debris inside. The cabin had been abandoned for quite some time, and dust and dirt had built up in every corner. There were old furniture pieces that had seen better days, and random piles of things left behind by the previous owner. Mark's mind raced with ideas for what the cabin could become, and he was eager to start making it feel like home. David, on the other hand, was more focused on the land surrounding the cabin. He started by clearing away the thick brush that had overtaken the yard, his muscles working hard as he chopped down branches and trimmed back the trees. He had always enjoyed working with his hands, and this kind of physical labor felt good to him. It was a way to disconnect from the stress of daily life and reconnect with nature. As they worked, the brothers couldn't help but notice the beauty of the area surrounding the cabin. The forest was thick with towering trees, the leaves a mix of vibrant green and golden hues. The air was fresh, and the quietness of the place gave them a sense of peace that was hard to find in the city. It was a relief, a welcome change. They both knew this was exactly what they needed. One evening, after a long day of work, they decided to take a break and sit outside on the small porch that wrapped around the front of the cabin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape, the brothers leaned back in their chairs and talked about their plans for the cabin. They discussed building a deck, adding a small garden, and even starting a vegetable patch to make their retreat as self-sufficient as possible. "This place is going to be incredible," Mark said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. David nodded. "I can already see it. We'll have a fire pit out here, maybe even some hammocks between the trees. A place to just relax, not a care in the world." They laughed, imagining how they would spend weekends by the fire, cooking meals, and enjoying the peace of their secluded retreat. But despite the fun and lightheartedness of the moment, there was something else on Mark's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the letter they had found in the chest. What did it mean? Why had the previous owner left it behind? The thought kept him up that night, turning over in his mind. He decided that he needed to learn more about the cabin's history, so he began researching the surrounding area. He found that the land had been part of a larger homestead many years ago, but the original owners had moved away long before the brothers bought the cabin. The information was sparse, but there were hints of something unusual, a history of the land that wasn't fully known. Mark and David didn't have much time to focus on it, though, as the next few days were filled with more work on the cabin. They tackled the walls, sanding them down and patching up any holes. They also started working on the floor, replacing some of the rotting wood. It was tough, tedious work, but they enjoyed the challenge. Each task brought them closer to their vision for the place. One afternoon, as they were cleaning out the attic, David stumbled upon something strange. He was moving old boxes when he noticed something hidden behind a stack of wooden planks. It was another chest, much smaller than the one they had found before, but still intriguing. "Hey, Mark, come check this out," David called. Mark climbed up to the attic and joined David. They both stared at the chest for a moment, as if trying to figure out what it could possibly hold. This was the second chest they had found in the cabin, and it only added to the mystery. There was a strange sense of anticipation in the air. It felt like they were uncovering something hidden, something important. David carefully lifted the chest and set it down in front of them. The wood was old and worn, with intricate carvings on the surface. This chest, however, wasn't locked. David opened it, and inside they found several old tools, a few more strange documents, and something that caught Mark's eye immediately: a small, beautifully carved box. It looked like it was made from a rich, dark wood, and there were intricate patterns etched into its surface. Mark's fingers itched to open it, but something told him to be careful. He could feel that this wasn't just any ordinary box. It had been placed there for a reason, and it seemed to carry an energy of its own. "Should we open it?" David asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Mark hesitated. "Let's hold off for now. We've already found so much. Let's clean up and we can look at it later." David agreed, and they set the box aside, continuing with their work. As the day went on, the excitement of the discovery started to wear off. They finished cleaning the attic and moved on to their next tasks. But even as they worked, Mark couldn't help but wonder about the box and the strange things they were finding. It felt as though they were part of a story that had been waiting for them to uncover. That night, as the brothers sat by the fire in the living room, they spoke more about their plans for the future. They discussed how they would make the cabin more comfortable, how they would keep it simple yet functional. But there was still an underlying tension in the air. The discoveries they had made were too strange to ignore. Mark was sure that there was more to this cabin than they had realized. "I'm going to research this place more tomorrow," Mark said, his voice quieter than usual. "There's something here, something we're not seeing yet." David raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. "All right, just don't get too caught up in it. We came here to relax, remember?" Mark nodded, though his mind was far from relaxed. He could feel that something was drawing him in, something that was waiting to be discovered beneath the surface. The next morning, Mark woke up earlier than usual. The air outside the cabin was still cool, and a light mist hung in the trees, making the forest look like something out of a dream. He stepped outside and breathed in the fresh air, feeling the quietness settle in around him. This was exactly what he had hoped for when they bought the cabin: the peace, the stillness. But there was something else on his mind, something that had been bothering him ever since their discoveries the day before. The small, carved box that they had found in the attic haunted him. Why was it so carefully hidden away? What did it contain? The chest in the living room had been strange enough, but this new discovery felt like it was part of something much bigger. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something significant, something that would change everything. He decided to get to work early. As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, he started searching the cabin for anything else that might give him a clue. He moved from room to room, checking every corner and crevice, trying to see if there was something else hidden away. But everything seemed as it should, ordinary and untouched, except for the strange items they had already found. David, still half asleep, wandered into the kitchen and began making coffee. "You're up early," he commented, glancing over his shoulder as he poured water into the kettle. Mark smiled but didn't answer right away. He was lost in thought, his mind turning over all the possibilities. "I just want to finish some things," he said after a moment. "Let's head into town today, get some supplies, but I want to check something first." David raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. "Sure. Whatever you need." After a quick breakfast, the two of them went about their day. The morning was spent organizing the cabin a little more, David working outside to tidy the yard, while Mark, still feeling that sense of unease, focused on cleaning out the remaining rooms. But every time Mark moved a piece of furniture or opened a drawer, he couldn't help but think back to the small carved box they had found. He knew he needed to open it, but a part of him hesitated. It felt too important to rush into. Finally, after a couple of hours of cleaning, Mark couldn't wait any longer. He found the box in the attic, still sitting untouched, and decided it was time to open it. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid, the air around him thick with anticipation. Inside, the box contained several objects: small, delicate items, each one seemingly insignificant on its own. There was a tiny stone pendant, an old coin, a worn leather pouch with a strange symbol on it, and a folded piece of paper. Mark carefully lifted the paper, unfolding it to reveal what looked like a map. The map was faded, the lines almost invisible, but there was something about it that felt old, ancient even. The markings on the map seemed to point to a location deep within the forest, not far from the cabin. But what struck Mark as most strange was the symbol on the map, which matched the one on the leather pouch. He stared at the map for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Why would someone hide a map here inside this cabin, tucked away in a box? It didn't make any sense. This wasn't just some random collection of items. It was part of something bigger, something that had been hidden for a reason. David soon joined him in the attic, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the items Mark had laid out on the floor. "What's all this?" he asked. Mark didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the map, his mind racing. "I think we've stumbled onto something bigger than just a cabin. This stuff, these items, they don't belong here. They're part of something important." David crouched down next to Mark, inspecting the items with a curious eye. "So what's the deal with the map? Does it lead somewhere?" Mark nodded slowly, still deep in thought. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Look at the symbols. They match the one on the pouch. And this map. It seems to point to a spot in the forest not far from here." David's eyes widened. "Wait, are you saying there's something hidden out there? Like treasure?" "I don't know," Mark replied, shaking his head. "But whatever it is, it's not just some coincidence. This cabin, the things we've found, it's all connected." David leaned back, processing the information. "I don't know, man. This is starting to sound like a treasure hunt or something. We're in the middle of nowhere. What if it's all just old junk?" Mark didn't respond right away. He knew David was skeptical, but deep down he felt something was off about this place. The discoveries they had made weren't just random, they were part of a bigger story, and now that they had found the map, it felt like it was calling them to follow it. "We should check it out," Mark said finally. "If this leads to something, we can't just ignore it. Who knows what else we might find?" David stood up slowly, looking out the attic window toward the forest. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Mark didn't answer, but his determined expression said it all. He had already made up his mind. He was going to follow the map, even if it meant venturing deep into the forest. There was something about this mystery that was too compelling to ignore. That afternoon, after a quick lunch, the two brothers set out into the woods. They packed some water, a few snacks, and a couple of flashlights just in case. The forest was dense, and the trail wasn't easy to follow, but Mark kept his eyes on the map, making sure they stayed on the right path. As they ventured further into the woods, the air grew cooler, the shadows longer. The trees were thicker here, and the ground was covered with moss, making each step feel soft and quiet. Mark could feel the weight of the map in his pocket, his anticipation growing with every step. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," David said, breaking the silence. "This is like something out of a movie." Mark laughed softly. "Yeah, but it's real. And I need to know what's out here." The forest seemed to go on forever, and the further they walked, the more isolated they felt. There were no sounds of animals, no birds singing. The only noise was the crunch of leaves underfoot. It was as though they had entered another world, one that had been hidden for years. After what felt like hours, they finally reached a small clearing. The trees opened up, revealing a large, flat rock. Mark stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. The rock looked out of place, too smooth, too perfectly positioned in the middle of the forest. He pulled out the map, studying it closely. The spot they had just reached was marked clearly, the symbol from the pouch appearing right next to it. "This is it," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where the map led us." David looked at the rock, then back at Mark, his expression a mixture of disbelief and awe. "What now?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward, kneeling down beside the rock. As he did, he noticed something that had been hidden in the moss, something shiny. Reaching down, he carefully uncovered a small, rusty metal latch. David stared at him. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Mark's heart raced as he gently pulled at the latch. The ground beneath the rock shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. The mysteries of the cabin, and perhaps the entire forest, were starting to unravel. The brothers had just begun their journey into something much larger than they could have imagined. Mark's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled open the metal latch, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment the latch gave way, a faint, almost imperceptible sound echoed through the clearing. The earth around the large rock shifted just a bit, revealing a small compartment hidden beneath the stone. For a moment, everything seemed still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. David stepped forward, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What do you think is inside?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't answer. He simply reached down and carefully lifted the stone that had been covering the hidden space. The rock was heavy, but with a little effort, he managed to move it just enough to reveal a dark cavity beneath it. The air felt colder now, as though the forest had taken on a different atmosphere, one full of mystery. Inside the compartment was a small, weathered box, its surface smooth and worn down with age. The box was made of wood, much like the chest they had found earlier, but this one had intricate carvings etched into the sides, symbols Mark couldn't quite understand. As he reached for it, he felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just any box, it was different. It felt important, like it had been waiting for someone to uncover it. Mark carefully lifted the box out of its hiding place and turned it over in his hands. The carvings seemed to glow faintly, almost as if they were alive. He knew they had found something extraordinary, something that had been hidden for a long time. For a moment, all he could do was stare at it, mesmerized by the patterns on its surface. David, sensing the gravity of the moment, leaned in closer. "What do we do now?" he asked. Mark didn't speak for a few seconds, his mind racing with possibilities. He had no idea what this box contained, but it was clear that it was no ordinary object. It seemed to hold a deep significance, something tied to the history of the cabin and the strange discoveries they had made. The thought that they might be uncovering something truly ancient thrilled him, but also filled him with uncertainty. What if they weren't meant to find this? What if they had uncovered something better left hidden? "Let's open it," Mark said quietly, almost to himself. With a deep breath, he gently lifted the lid of the box. Inside, there were several objects, each more intriguing than the last. The first item that caught his eye was an old, folded piece of paper. He pulled it out carefully, unfolding it with shaking hands. The paper was fragile, its edges yellowed with age. The handwriting on it was elegant, written in a language Mark didn't recognize. The characters were unlike anything he had seen before, flowing smoothly across the page, almost like a form of art. Mark turned the paper over, hoping to find something that would explain what it was. But there was nothing, just more of the strange writing. He glanced at David, who was watching him intently. "Do you know what this says?" David asked, clearly puzzled. Mark shook his head. "No, but we need to figure it out." The second item in the box was a small, silver pendant. It was shaped like a circle, with intricate designs carved into its surface. Mark held it up to the light, watching as it shimmered in the sun. The pendant was beautiful, but there was something about it that felt significant. It wasn't just jewelry, it felt like a key or a clue to something larger. The third item was a small wooden token, no bigger than the palm of Mark's hand. It had a similar symbol to the ones they had seen before, carved deeply into the wood. The symbol seemed to pulse with a strange energy, almost as though it were alive. Mark ran his finger along the grooves of the carving, feeling a strange pull toward it. David was silent as Mark continued to inspect the objects in the box. It was clear to both of them now. Whatever this was, it was more than just an old artifact. It was part of something bigger, something that had been hidden away for a reason. "I think we need to take these back to the cabin," Mark said after a long pause. "There's got to be a way to figure out what this means. We can't just leave it out here." David nodded, his eyes still on the objects in the box. "Yeah, let's head back." This is getting more and more interesting. With the box in hand, the brothers made their way back to the cabin. The journey seemed longer this time as the weight of their discovery hung over them. The forest, which had once felt like a peaceful retreat, now seemed filled with secrets and hidden dangers. They were no longer just two brothers looking for a quiet getaway. They were part of something larger, something mysterious that was pulling them deeper into its web. When they finally arrived back at the cabin, the sun was beginning to set. The soft glow of the evening light cast long shadows across the yard, and the air had grown cooler. Mark and David set the box down on the kitchen table, both of them still in a daze from what they had just uncovered. They sat down in front of it, staring at the items inside. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, as if the air itself was waiting for them to make the next move. "Do you think this has anything to do with the hermit?" David asked, breaking the silence. Mark nodded slowly. It has to. The writing, the symbols, it all points to something bigger, something that's been hidden for a long time. But why? Why was it buried here, and why did the hermit leave it behind? David thought for a moment. Maybe he didn't leave it behind. Maybe he was trying to protect it, or maybe he knew someone would find it eventually. Mark glanced at the box again, his eyes narrowing in thought. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's clear that we've only scratched the surface. There's more to this cabin, to this land, than we could have ever imagined. The brothers spent the next several hours examining the contents of the box, taking notes, and trying to decipher the strange language on the paper. They knew they couldn't do it alone. They would need help, but who could they turn to? What kind of experts could unravel the mystery they had found? As the night grew darker, Mark's thoughts turned to the future. He couldn't shake the feeling that their discovery was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, it was bound to be something incredible. But for now, they needed to figure out what the objects meant, how they connected to the cabin, and what it all had to do with the hermit. Little did they know the answers would soon come, but they would come at a cost. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the forest wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. There were things lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And Mark and David were about to find themselves caught in a mystery much deeper and darker than they could have ever imagined. The days following their discovery felt like a blur to Mark and David. They were consumed by the mystery of the box and the strange objects it contained. The more they examined the items, the more questions arose. What did the symbols mean? Why had they been hidden in the cabin? And most importantly, what was the connection to the hermit who had once lived there? The brothers spent the next several days researching, trying to uncover the truth behind the mysterious artifacts. Mark had become obsessed with the old letter they had found earlier, and he pored over every word, attempting to decipher the strange writing. Though it was difficult, he was sure that the letter held the key to understanding everything. But it was clear that they couldn't do it alone. They needed help. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of the map and symbols, David spoke up. We need to talk to someone who knows about ancient languages or history. This stuff is beyond us. Mark looked up from the map, his eyes tired but determined. I agree. We've reached a point where we need answers, but who do we turn to? David thought for a moment. There's a university not far from here. Maybe we could talk to someone in their archaeology department. They might know something about these symbols, or at least point us in the right direction. It was the first real plan they had come up with in days, and Mark was willing to try anything. The next morning, they packed up the items from the cabin, carefully wrapping the map, pendant, token, and letter, and headed into town to the university. The campus was busy with students walking between buildings, and the sun was shining brightly in the clear blue sky. Mark and David felt out of place, walking into the sleek, modern buildings with their worn-out jeans and hiking boots, but they were determined to find someone who could help them. They walked into the archaeology department and were directed to a professor named Dr. Elizabeth Parker, who had been researching ancient cultures and languages for many years. When they explained their situation to her, she was intrigued but skeptical. This sounds unusual, she said, carefully inspecting the items they had brought with them. But I'm willing to take a look. If this is what you say it is, it could be important. Mark and David watched as she examined the map, her eyes narrowing in concentration. She flipped it over, studied the symbols, and then turned her attention to the letter. This is fascinating, Dr. Parker said, her voice tinged with excitement. The script here looks like an old form of writing, possibly from a lost civilization. The symbols, they remind me of something, but I can't place it just yet. Mark leaned forward. What do you think it all means? Dr. Parker paused, deep in thought. It's hard to say right now, but I'll need to do some research. These artifacts could be much older than you realize. It might take time to decipher the language and understand the significance of the symbols, but I promise I'll help. Grateful for her willingness to assist, Mark and David left the university that afternoon with a sense of hope. For the first time since they had uncovered the box, they felt as though they were on the right track. They had someone who could help them decode the mystery. But as they walked back to the car, a feeling of unease crept over Mark. There was something about the artifacts that didn't sit right with him. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that this wasn't just an old relic, it was part of something much bigger. And the deeper they dug, the more they felt like they were stirring something up that had been buried for a reason. That night, as they sat by the fire in the cabin, they talked about their findings. The glow of the fire flickered across the walls, casting long shadows in the dimly lit room. "This is all starting to feel real," David said, his voice thoughtful. "It's like we've uncovered a hidden part of history." Mark nodded. "I don't know. It feels like we're on the edge of something bigger, but the more we learn, the more I'm starting to think we shouldn't be digging around in the first place." David looked at him. "What do you mean?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts racing. "I don't know. It's just, there's something about this cabin, these symbols, that makes me think we're not supposed to find them. It's like they were hidden for a reason." David frowned. "You're starting to sound like those people who think we shouldn't mess with things that are better left alone." "I'm not saying that," Mark replied quickly. I have this feeling. The more we uncover, the more I feel like we're not supposed to be part of this story. Like it's bigger than us." David considered this for a moment before shrugging. "Maybe, but we're already in it. We can't just turn back now." Mark sighed. He knew David was right. They had come too far to stop now, but the sense of unease still lingered, gnawing at him. The next few days passed slowly as they waited for Dr. Parker to finish her research. They continued working on the cabin, but it felt like the time was standing still. Every morning, Mark would check the mailbox, hoping to find an update, but there was nothing. Days turned into weeks, and they began to grow restless. They had uncovered so much, yet they still didn't know what it all meant. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they received a call from Dr. Parker. "I have something for you," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've managed to decipher part of the writing, and I believe I've uncovered the story behind the symbols. It's remarkable." Mark and David rushed back to the university, eager to learn what Dr. Parker had discovered. When they arrived, she was waiting for them in her office, papers spread out on the desk in front of her. "I've studied the symbols, and it looks like they are tied to an ancient civilization that existed thousands of years ago. They were believed to have lived in this area, and the artifacts you found are connected to their rituals and beliefs. The pendant, the token, and the map, these were all part of a religious ceremony, one that was meant to protect a great secret." Mark's heart raced as he listened, his thoughts swirling. "What secret?" Dr. Parker hesitated before answering. "I believe it has something to do with an ancient treasure, one that was hidden to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The hermit who lived in the cabin was likely a guardian of that secret. He may have been the last person entrusted with protecting it." The weight of her words sank in. Mark and David had unknowingly stumbled upon something that had been hidden for centuries. The treasure wasn't just gold or jewels, it was something far more valuable, and the more they uncovered, the more they realized how dangerous it could be. "What do we do now?" David asked, his voice quiet. Dr. Parker looked at them with a solemn expression. "I don't know. But I suggest you proceed carefully. You've uncovered a piece of history, but it may be best to leave the rest of it undisturbed." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. They had already come so far, but the weight of the secret they had uncovered was heavier than anything they had ever imagined. The cabin, the forest, and the artifacts, they were all part of something far bigger than they could have ever anticipated. The brothers stood in silence, contemplating the road ahead. Whatever they decided to do, one thing was certain: their lives had changed forever. They had unearthed something that no one else had ever seen, and now the mystery of the tiny cabin in the forest was theirs to solve.